Before we dive in, I want to thank today's sponsor, Searchality, for supporting the Independent School Moonshot podcast. When I ask a school leader to name their top 3 headaches, recruitment, retention of staff inevitably comes up. Talent shortages, costs, and the need for continuous recruitment strategies are some of the current challenges you may face. Searchality is here to help schools minimize the pain and the cost of recruiting faculty and staff with a smart platform built exclusively for K-12 schools. Built and run by a team of people who understand schools and hiring, Searchality works to make it easier for the people who oversee and make the recruitment decisions. With a strong database of talented teachers both in the US and internationally, Searchality also makes the application process work for candidates, matching vacancies with candidates' qualifications, experience, and career goals. Integrating easily with school website, onboarding is a matter of hours. Searchality eases the pain of the HR teams, heads, and business managers by drastically reducing the time and cost involved in faculty recruitment, while leaving candidates with a positive application experience. To learn how Searchality can support your school, visit searchality.com. That's SearchAlity.com. And now on to the show. Hi there, my friend. I'm Peter Barron. Welcome to today's episode of the Independent School Moonshot podcast. I am thrilled to be joined by Leigh Toomey. She's the CEO and founder of LeadHERship Educational Solutions. Has had an amazing career in independent schools, former head of school, and we're going to talk today about a couple of things. We're going to talk about leadership readiness, and what does that mean? What does that mean as you move into the head of school role, especially as you think about the operational complexity that comes with leading a school and all the different facets that are part of it. I'm really excited to dig into this, but before we do, Leigh, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Peter. I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Hey, before we get going, can you introduce yourself and your company?
My name is Leigh Toomey, and I am the CEO and founder of LeadHERship Educational Solutions. LeadHERship Educational Solutions was really founded, I would dare say, as an intersection between what you were talking about, making sure that women executives are leadership ready and understand operational fluency of the independent school world. It has branched out a little bit from just specifically working with educators into also working with just women in executive leadership positions. How I arrived at this level in my career is I actually started in business. So I hold an MBA and I was in for-profit for many years and then transitioned into what I called my second career, which was education, because it was just something that I always wanted to do, was incredibly passionate about, and I became a teacher. So I taught for a little while, got my master's in teaching, and then pursued and got a master's in leadership education. And then had various leadership roles in the independent school world and eventually landed as a head of school, and then left that position. What I thought it was going to do was actually retire, and then started getting a bunch of phone calls from women in leadership who were really just looking for some guidance as to moving into leadership roles, but also when I'm in this leadership role, how do I sustain this? Right now that I'm here, what do I do? And so this is really where this whole business morphed from.
Well, let's talk about some of those calls that you got, because I know as you've been having those conversations, you've been getting questions from women leaders around like, am I ready for this role? Are there themes that tend to emerge from those conversations? And I know a big part of what you do is helping folks understand, like, look, you have these strengths, like you bring like great energy and great skill to the conversation. I'm curious, like where does that all land for you?
I would say probably the biggest theme that arises is, hey, I'm doing all this work, but I don't know if I'm ready for leadership. So it's really having conversation around recognizing patterns, right? Are you in positions of authority? Do people come to you and ask you to make decisions, right? Are you a lead? Are you a lead on some team? Are you working on a task force, right? So that's really where this conversation goes. So that's primarily the theme that I see when people ask around, am I ready for leadership? It's just recognizing that you actually are already doing leadership. You just don't have the title. So that's really the important part about recognizing the skill sets that you're doing You just haven't been given the title of leader.
It's fascinating to me because you're helping people recognize where their strengths are. But I imagine as you're having these conversations, as you're doing the coaching, you're also uncovering areas where there are opportunities for folks to grow. And so I'm curious, like, how do you help leaders identify those growth areas and help build plans in terms of strengthening them?
So what we'll do is we'll actually look at what they're doing already, right? And we'll start naming out some of those skill sets. The other thing is too, is to help them recognize that they are ready. A lot of women minimize what their skill sets are. And they don't know how to name them. So we'll go through helping to name what some of those skill sets are. And so from there, we'll start talking about what is it that you want to learn? Because when you're moving up in a leadership position, you don't know what that role entails. You think you know what that role entails, but you actually don't. So are you willing and ready to learn? That's important because some people don't have the bandwidth to want to do that. They just want to step into the leadership role and do what they've already been doing. But that is not why you're being hired. You're being hired for your skill set. You don't have experience doing that role yet. So then you have to be willing to learn. And in doing so, you have to be willing to advocate for yourself. So I would encourage women to understand, especially in the educational world, what is it that the role you're seeking is, the clarity around what that role actually entails. I encourage women to sit a day in that role, ask to sit in on those, especially for growth, right? If you want to be ahead of school, you got to start and you have no experience in, let's say, finance. You better start asking to sit in on some of these meetings with the finance director and the head of school, maybe the finance committee from the board, right? Advocate for yourself, put you in instances and roles where you're observing decision-making happening.
I really appreciate how you talk about advocating for yourself, like learning these skills, sitting in on meetings with the head and the finance director, maybe being part of a finance committee meeting, because, you and I have talked about before is that for senior leaders who want to be heads of school, one thing that I have learned, especially when I talk to new heads of school, is that when they land in the role, they come to understand how steep the learning curve is on the business side of running a school, whether it's operations, whatnot. And, if you're rising through the ranks on the academic side of the house, maybe you don't have exposure to budgeting or enrollment strategy or advancement or like deep, like strategic thinking around those areas. So I guess the question is as a senior leader is preparing to become a head, or even if you're a new head of school, how do you build that capacity without feeling overwhelmed?
That's a great question, because it can be overwhelming. Certainly, there are a lot of expertise that you now are in charge of that you need to know. I'm going to say the very first thing, let's just say new head of school. The very first thing that I would recommend is that you stop looking at operations like a checklist and you start looking at it from a strategic lens. And I'll give you a couple examples of that. So you're looking at your budget. You're a new head of school. You're going to land in that job. That budget's already going to be created. You've inherited it. And so you're just going to run with it for the year. Maybe year 2 or even year 3, you start looking at the priorities of your school and you start having some real conversation with the finance committee as well as your CFO around your priorities. And what are the priorities of the school? Your resources should always basically tell a story that this is your mission. What you'll find is that a lot of CFOs are actually bookkeepers, and that's just reality. And so there's a lot of plug and play when it comes to budgets. So they take what they did last year and they plug it into this year. And that's how we run the budget. That actually shouldn't be happening. You should be looking at your budget from a strategic lens. And you should be saying, what are the actual priorities of this school and how do we fund those priorities, right? Maybe the second example of that would be advancement, right? Advancement isn't asking for money. Advancement is building relationships and trust. So let's say little Johnny's dad wants to come in and write you a check for a Lego robotics because little Johnny loves Lego robotics. Well, little Johnny's dad actually is a owns a multi-million dollar company and could potentially be a much bigger ask than building a Lego robotics lab, right? So there are strategic things you need to think about when it comes to finance. And what ends up happening is when you're a new head of school, if you've never been experienced, you don't have any experience in finance, you're just struggling to learn the language around some of these things, right? So for someone that wants to be a head of school, again, I would encourage them to seek out opportunities to gain that knowledge.
You just said something that I'm like, yes, I love how you framed it around looking at your budget as a narrative or as a story. I think that is so smart because it isn't just numbers on a page. It really does tell the story of what's important to our organization and how are we going to, move forward as an organization to hit whatever those aspirational goals are.
For sure. I think one of the biggest things for a head of school, right, is articulating your story. And you do that in many ways. And it's not just verbally, but you do it by the policies and procedures that you have in place. You do it by the way that you communicate. You do it by the relationships and the trust that you have with faculty, students, and parents, right? You're really, as a head of school, that's your primary responsibility, is to be articulating the mission of the school through all of the areas in your school, not just through parent night. Right.
Yeah. Right. And I imagine that causes a lot of pressure on heads, right? Because that's enormous, responsibility. And so, many heads respond to pressure by like working harder, right? We're going to work harder, and potentially set the same expectation for their team. And that, intellectually you kind of understand that, but from a lived experience, that's not sustainable. It causes burnout. It has all sorts of, unintended effects. So from your perspective as a coach, as a former head, what's a healthier model for leadership capacity that doesn't just rely solely on effort?
I love that you asked this question because effort isn't strategy, right? We've heard this a million times. Work smarter, not harder, right? But we get into the head of schools this is a high pressure job. Basically, you're a CEO, you're running multi-million-dollar corporation. Basically, it's a non-for-profit, but most of the time, not all the time, some are for-profit, but this is high pressure stakes when you get into these roles. So for me, it was really about building your team that can support you, because you're not going to have all the answers. And so the best thing you can do is build a team around you that, one, either has those answers or is smart enough to find those answers for you. Yeah. Right. And then the second part of that is trusting in your team. So again, coming back to relationships, building those trust relationships with your team so that they are empowered to make decisions in their particular area of expertise. Right. And then once you do that, you delegate it. That's all the other big struggle, right? We think we need to be involved in every decision as a head of school because ultimately the decision comes back to you. But if you trust in your team to make the right decisions for you and you can delegate and then hold those people accountable, right? And have systems in place. Again, we come back to systems and procedures and policies, but have those systems in place for accountability, but support, right? Then things run a little bit smoother, and it takes this need to be involved in everything off of your plate a little bit. It gives you more time and more opportunity to focus on the things that are actually moving the school forward.
Yeah. So, and I guess the question I have is that if you don't have that kind of structure in place, is, potentially a scenario could emerge where a head and the leadership team is like just navigating a whole bunch of different priorities, shifting priorities. We're adding things, we're adding. One of the things I talk about a lot is like institutions, not just schools. I mean, any organization, right? We're really good at adding, we're really bad at taking away, right? So, hopefully most schools are saying, hey, these are our institutional priorities for the year, and we're going to be, really disciplined about it. But my guess is that there are probably lots of organizations that do that work and then start tacking more things on as the year goes. And it could be that, things are shifting. It could be that, they're getting more, the expectations from the board is rising. There are any number of reasons. But, I guess my question is, what skill or skills help a head clarify or actually bring clarity and manage up effectively so that you're protecting that team energy? You're not like doing the shiny object thing, that you are really kind of systematically thinking these are the things that matter the most.
So if we're talking about managing up to a board, I'm assuming that's sort of what we're
certainly part of that question. Yeah, right. For sure. Yeah.
For me, I found managing up to a board was always remembering that school boards, especially independent school boards, are substantially different than for-profit boards, right? You're entering a room full of people that are committed to your school because they're either a parent, an alumni, or a community member that's just vested in the success of your school. Most of the time, they're not educators, so they don't have the understanding and the clarity as to the decision making that you're doing. So always keeping that in the forefront and really depersonalizing all of it. It's just people that don't have your background or your expertise that are asking questions. So if you can be in the forefront of what and perceive sort of what some of the questions you're anticipate some of the questions that you're going to get and be able to articulate and answer those prior. That is always very helpful. That way it never really becomes contentious, nor should it ever be contentious because you're on the same side. I used to say this to parents that we would have sort of contentious conversations. We're on the same side here. We want the same thing. There's really no reason to be adversaries about anything, right? So being able to explain and have conversation around some of the priorities that you feel are best for the school and why. I think the second most important thing when you're talking about managing a board and a board expectation is to navigate the sense of urgency. The board always thinks everything is the most important. You're going to go to a board meeting the next month, you're going to come back, something else is going to be the priority, and they're going to want you to flip priority. So it's about, at times, holding your ground and explaining why the sense of urgency that they have actually isn't the reality of the school, right? Not that you're not going to get to that, but here's all the reasons why we started this path, and we'll continue on that. Right. And we're not going to be in these sort of reactionary states all the time because that's not how good business runs. And most of these people are business people and they can understand that. So sometimes when you put it into really a business perspective, they understand it a little bit better. There are times though when schools are in reactionary mode. Sure. And it happens a lot. When I was head of school, I navigated the Nashville school shooting. That was an incredibly reactionary moment for our school community. Yeah. But it's being able to shift out of reactionary into being strategic and proactive. I think that sustains you throughout the times that you are reactive.
So what does that look like in terms of navigating that up to the board level or managing that up at the board level? Is it every year, you work with the board to establish their board priorities and those are always going to be front and center throughout the year so that people are aligned, or are there other things that I'm not thinking about?
No, I think you're absolutely correct. You work with a lot of boards. I think that's absolutely the way it happens, right? You have your summer session where you sort of talk about what the priorities are for the school. And you, as a head of school, you should absolutely be involved in that. You are day to day in that school. You understand where the pulse of the community, you understand what's working and what's not working in regards to educating children, right? You're always mission forward. So you're looking at, are the policies, procedures, the curriculum, whatever that looks like that we have in place, are we still being true to our mission? Right. And I think it is important that it is a two-way street, and that you're listening to what the board feels is a priority, but they're also listening to you.
Yeah, I love that. That's really great. As you're working with aspiring leaders, women leaders, what patterns do you see that show up in them for those that grow into really successful heads, or maybe those who stall out? Like, are there patterns that you've identified that you can help people avoid?
I would say their patterns are they're trying to do it all. And we just sort of talked about this a little bit, right? They're overly involved in all of the decision making because they're worried that eventually, something may fall through the cracks. So they have to be involved in everything. So, my recommendation and sort of my guidance is really to help them create the team that they can trust and manage, and then to delegate and step back and then hold people accountable, which is the big one. People get very uncomfortable in that space of accountability.
Yeah, I mean, this is a big part of why I bring this operating system concept to schools, is because accountability is built in. Like it's just a regular part of, how things function. I'm curious, I know this is probably a question that really gets to the core of the work that you do, but if a school wants to grow its future heads, especially women and leaders coming from academic roles, what practical steps can they take to build that internal pipeline?
So they need to be looking for who their potential leaders could be. So they need to start paying attention to what some of their staff members are doing, right? They're probably doing, which in most schools and every job in a school, they're doing 2 to 3 times more than their actual job description. So start paying attention, start asking your senior leadership team, who do you recognize as emerging leaders in the school and why? Right. I'm sure they have a list, to be
Yeah.
honest with
Right.
you.
Right.
And then approaching those people and stating, listen, you have been recognized by maybe it's your division director for showing leadership qualities as team lead in 5th grade or whatever that looks like. Is leadership something that you would be interested in? If so, we would love to talk more about that, right? You can provide mentorships. First you want to ask if somebody actually wants to be a leader. If they're not going to come to you, which some people do. I mean, some people will come to you and say, this is where I really want to be. And then you can put a plan in place to give them leadership opportunities throughout the school year. I love a good task force. When I was at high school, I had a million task force going. And it was usually, if you were on a task force, it was usually because that was something you were passionate about. Right. And so it never really felt like extra work for people because it was a subject that they were passionate about. And I loved that. I loved giving people opportunity to have say and influence in what happens in the school community.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, just thinking about natural ways to give people leadership opportunities, a task force, or maybe you're part of a working group tied to the strategic plan. I mean, there's all sorts of ways that you can do that. The last question for you. So if someone's listening to this and they're like, you know what, I am super drawn to leadership. I could see that being part of my future, but I'm not entirely sure what the next step is. What would you encourage them to do?
That's a great question. Gosh. I think it's really, really doing a deep dive into, is leadership that's something real that I really want to do, and what role do I think I want to do, and then finding out what that role really entails. Right, the time commitment, the skill sets needed to do that role. Do I need to further my education? Really, what does that look like? You can always reach out to someone like me. It doesn't have to be me.
Yeah.
But you can always reach out. I mean, there's lots of consultants and coaches out there who have a vast experience in that could really just brainstorm with you and help you have conversation around that. Something that I do, and it's literally just a service thing that I do because I'm passionate about women in education and certainly passionate about women in leadership, is that I provide 10 hours a month of just free brainstorming sessions. And
That's awesome.
yeah, you can and it's literally a working 30 minutes. It's not a sales call. I'm not trying to talk you into leadership. I'm not trying to do anything. It's me sharing the expertise that I have. If you feel that you could benefit from that, I'm happy to give that. And I do that. And I do 10 hours of that a month. And that was something that was really important to me when I started this business, that I had a service component to it.
Yeah, it's a great way to give back, a great way to mentor. I said that was the last question. I actually have one more question. So if somebody is listening to this and they want to reach out, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can just contact me at Leah@LeadHERship Educational Solutions.com. So they can just email me and if they go to my website, LeadHERship Educational Solutions.com, there's means to contact me through there.
Perfect. I'll make sure to link to your website in the show notes. Yeah, of course. Leigh Toomey, CEO and founder of LeadHERship Educational Solutions. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Oh, you're welcome. It's always great to talk to you. And I love our conversations. And even though we won't be on a podcast, I hope we can continue the conversation elsewhere.
Absolutely. This is great. All right. Thank you, Leah.
Okay. Bye-bye.